Hello and welcome everyone to this evening's community gathering, a gift offered by Shaman's Collective. This is Shari BaDu and tonight's topic is a shaman's way of being, the gift of hitting bottom, a path to soul recovery. As people are joining onto the call, I want to take a moment to personally thank Shaman's Collective, especially Anasuya Krishnaswamy and her vision. Shaman's Collective is a platform where we can come together and we can share our experience, our strength, and our hope, where we can share our medicine in community. I also want to acknowledge all of those who have registered for tonight's podcast. We've had a wonderful turnout, which tells me this evening's topic is relevant. As I said, I am Shari BaDu, and for those who don't know me, let me take a moment and introduce myself. I am a traditional medicine woman, and I've lived in the Arizona desert for over 50 years. In the 70s, I became interested in many things, including Native American spirituality, as well as transcendental meditation. For many of us, that 1975 manuscript that put TM on the map was really an important instruction book for us. The title, TM, Discovering the Inner Energy and Overcoming Stress 40 years later, is just as prevalent as it was in 1975. I also have over 30 years experience in living a spiritual path called 12-step spirituality. I was first introduced in 1982 to the 12-step program. It only took a few years before I understood that there was a deeper journey. It wasn't about an ism. It was about healing soul sickness, and it was about soul recovery. I have come to understand the 12 steps as a spiritual path, a journey of soul recovery and authentic power, not limited to the dogma of what some would call an ism, but a path for anyone. I have discovered the mystery teachings that are held within the 12 steps as a shaman's way of being. Like many of those on the call tonight, I have been initiated into the lineage of the High Andes. I've had great opportunity to work with Master Shaman Portofino Chino Siqueiro, who once, when he found out my passion about working with people struggling with addiction, that darkest night of the soul, he gave me specific instructions in how to deal with addiction. Honoring Chino's wisdom, I have integrated his teachings into my practice. And for those who know me and who have studied with me, they will tell you I am dedicated to the education and the empowerment of those honestly seeking a deeper connection with life, whether physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. I openly advocate a shaman's way of being 12-step spirituality as a traditional medicine path for soul recovery. This is a way of living that has advantages for all. It is truly an alchemic journey for soul recovery. If you are interested in anything that I've said or might be interested in finding out even more about me, please go to sharibadu.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, all the regular social medias, as well as LinkedIn. I would love to connect with you. Of course, you can also find me on Shaman's Collective. As I said earlier, the interest in this subject is easily reflected by the number of people that have registered for tonight's podcast. We are all feeling the push and the pressure on our souls to understand, what is it to be shaman? What does it mean to be in the dark night of the soul, and where does hitting bottom fit in? And certainly, where is the gift? As we gather together, you are here for a reason. There has been something that has called to you to register for this call, to click the icon, to listen to a YouTube. There is something for you here energetically, just as there is something for you to offer. So tonight, as you're listening, I invite you to open up your heart, your mind, and your soul, and allow your soul to listen and allow your soul to guide you. Notice what words may trigger you. Notice if there are shadow pieces as I speak. Most important, what I've asked you to do is to surrender to the moment and to let it unfold. So as with more of us have gathered on the call, let us take a moment and gather in breath. Taking a deep, clear, cleansing breath, that deep breath of life, bring it into your lungs with a deep inhale and exhale, deep push. Let all that carbon dioxide and heaviness of the day go. Just let it go. As you come into the center of this moment, be here now. A shaman's way of being, the gift of hitting bottom, a path to soul recovery. Like we did with our breath coming together at that sacred time, let us also come together in common ground for understanding. As I said earlier when I introduced myself, I said I am a traditional medicine keeper. What does that mean? And again, where does it fit in with shamanism? For those who joined us on our August 13th podcast, A Shaman's Way of Being, Living Spiritual Principles of Self-Honesty, and the Power of Surrender, which if you haven't heard it and are interested, you can find it on my YouTube channel. This might be a little bit of a review, but for the sake of coming together in oneness, let me just take a moment and share about traditional medicine. And when we're looking at traditional medicine, I have to look back at my own history. By degree, you will find that I am a historian. And in the 80s, I earned my degree in history from Arizona State University. My early experiences into Native American spirituality, meditation, dream work, carried over into my studies at ASU. I can remember that I have always been fascinated with iconography, the power and the hidden meaning behind symbology and symbols. Of course, living in the Southwest, I was drawn to the Hopi, the Dene, as well as the Aztec, the Maya, and the Olmec, powerful symbols that these people had. And even as a young child, I understood the power of the symbolic world through dream time. I could look at paintings and jewelry, as well as poetry, and the symbols just seemed to have a different vibration for me. Later, I learned and I realized that symbols were the language and are the language of the soul, that they are the key to the shamanic map. One of my favorite places to be or to hide out or to get lost while at ASU were in the stacks of the Hayden Library. Even then, I noticed that as I read anthropological abstracts, a sudden shift in notation. More and more, I noticed the World Health Organization being cited. I noticed that by the late 70s, the World Health Organization, or the WHO, had adopted several resolutions regarding the wisdom and efficacy and viability of traditional medicine practices. As a student of life, I am always looking to learn and to study. And again, I noticed a trend, and in 2001, the WHO put forth a clear understanding of what they believed a traditional medicine practitioner was. And so as I discuss this with you, I'd like you to think, is this you? Is this how you carry your medicine? Is this how your mentor carries their medicine? The traditional medicine practitioner, according to the WHO and their cross-cultural survey, says this. It is a belief that life is the union of the body, the emotions, the mind, and the soul or the spirit. That health is balance. Illness occurs when the individual falls out of balance physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. The traditional medicine approach is a holistic approach in diagnosis and treatment, that a person is considered in their totality. The practitioner of traditional medicine often gives advice on lifestyle as well as healthy behaviors, and treatment is based on individual needs. Each individual has his or her own constitution and social circumstances, which result in different reactions to the cause of disease and the treatment. Continuing to establish the common ground, we turn to where does the shaman or the shaman practitioner fit into this model? The shaman, like other traditional practitioners, must have their roots firmly grounded in the belief system surrounding traditional medicine. As that shaman takes a road less traveled, what makes them uniquely different is the shaman's journey, also known as spirit flight. The shaman focuses intentionally to induce an altered state of consciousness, known as an ASC, to move in between the worlds, to move from an ordinary state of consciousness into a non-ordinary state of consciousness or reality. This move is often helped with the use of drums, rattles, even sleep deprivation or fasting. These are things that can aid the shaman in reaching an altered state of consciousness. It is this journey, this slipping in between the veils, that the shaman, one impeccable of intent and purity of purpose, sources the non-ordinary reality for information regarding their personal healing, the healing of a client, perhaps the healing of community, whether it's locally or globally. A master shaman is one who can drop into that altered state of consciousness without assistance of drumming, rattles, or even plant medicine. This wisdom keeper has a clear relationship between the ordinary and the non-ordinary world. In this state, the shaman sources the non-ordinary world for help, for information. The shaman never journeys without intention. And why? Because he understands the power behind the shamanic journey. He understands and honors when he communes with spirit guides, animal totems, and helpers. The non-ordinary world is truly a world of information, and the shaman honors that deeply. As he goes into that place of purity of intent and impeccability, he is gifted information which he brings back. As the shaman, whether it's a woman or a man, as they come in and out of that non-ordinary world, they have those gifts. They too understand that it is always a place of death, rebirth, and death again as they go in and out of the world. This evening, we're going to be talking about those gifts, the gift of hitting bottom, the gift of soul recovery. Most of us are aware and have experienced the trauma of soul loss, soul sickness, soul fright. We understand the pain of that soul fragmentation, no matter how it so shows up. And soul recovery is the goal, to become whole souled once again. So that gift that I talked about, the dictionary defines the gift as giving as well as receiving. I see this as being the ebb and the flow of life. It can be a bonus, an award. And in the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell talks about the ultimate gift. And the ultimate gift that is found in the dark night of the soul, he calls it the boon. And when we look up the word boon, we can also find words like the godsend, the windfall, the blessing. We can also know that this word gift describes a person, someone who is a gifted teacher, a gifted seer, one who is a gifted healer, one who has aptitude or expertise in a certain areas. Over the years, I have received many gifts from the dark night of the soul, especially in my youth. And I thought at the time it was bad luck and horrible things were just happening to me. I thought at one point it was punishment from God. I thought I was being punished for the things that I had done when I was even younger than just 21. As I grew wiser through trial and error, I began to respect the influence of the power of the dark night of the soul as a powerful teacher. I learned to understand that this confusion was often the prologue to some of the greatest changes, psychic changes in my life. When people ask me, just even briefly or generally, about that dark night of the soul, I have to defer to people wiser than myself. And certainly when Eckhart Tolle says this, it resonates. He says to accept and then act. Whatever the present moment contains, accept it as if you have chosen it. Always accept to work with it, not against it, and make it your friend, your ally, and not your enemy. This will miraculously transform your whole life. So when anyone is caught in that dark night of the soul, I turn to Eckhart Tolle and I share with them that wisdom to work with it, not against it. And this statement has been my goal. The darkness in my youth is certainly etched upon my soul, and today there are many great teachings from my life. I understand the darkness because I have been there. And I am grateful to the wisdom of my youth that somehow I was able to survive, even if it meant through drugs, sex, and rock and roll. We did survive. In Alice Miller's book, The Drama of a Gifted Child, that is the message of what that child does in those early years of living in darkness, that somehow courageously we learn to survive. This is a book of great wisdom, and I would suggest it for anyone. So one way I learned how to survive without a proper mentor, I learned to keep the pain at bay by dancing with the devil. As that pain of that soul loss multiplied, as many of us look to the many ways to get the pain away, to keep the dance, to keep from feeling, we turn to drugs, to sex, to food, to gambling, to smoking, even workaholism and codependent relationships. Why? Anything except being in the body. Being in the body meant that we had to feel, and that was too much. Sadly, what began to happen is those things that we turned to for relief, that thing that kept the devil at bay by dancing with the devil, slowly became the possession of the devil. We found ourselves thrown into deeper and deeper darkness, the meaningless of life, confusion, the overwhelming. We found ourselves in a deep, deep world that we had no idea how to get out or how to avoid it. I learned to respect the dark night of the soul. I take a moment and I look back again. Looking back, what do I think of and what do I see? In the Gnostic text, the Gospel according to Thomas, Master Yeshua ben Joseph said it so clearly. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. Interesting, the word save, when you start looking at it, the word that's come up often have to do with protection. So the gifts found in the darkness of the soul are really that which will protect you. Carl Jung, another wisdom keeper, tells us very simply, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. It is my desire as we gather today that we contemplate together, that we think of perhaps some new ideas, revisit some old thoughts, some old beliefs, and we continue to deepen our own personal medicine. As we look deeply into our own souls and contemplate different things, let us think about these questions. What is the dark night of the soul and why is it important for psychic change? How do I know if I've really hit bottom? Do we have to hit bottom? What is the difference between surrender and complying? How do I know if I am caught in the drama of the dark night of the soul? Is hitting bottom really necessary for spiritual recovery? The wisdom keepers of the 12-step model originally had a firm belief and importance that hitting bottom was necessary for recovery. Is this true today? Because what they ended up doing is softening their stance. Was this a good choice? Let's look first and probably a little bit more in detail than the other questions, but let's look at the dark night of the soul and why it's important to psychic change. The psychic change, first and foremost, is a change of nature. It's like crossing the river Jordan. It is going from one side to the other. It is the shaman's initiatory journey. It is a psychic dismemberment, the death of the ego to be born again, to emerge only to circle back around death once more. It is the rising phoenix from the ashes. It is a complete and utter change of heart, often triggered by a call to adventure. The Dark Night of the Soul is actually a poem written in the 16th century by a Roman Catholic mystic, St. John of the Cross. In this powerful and soulful writing, he describes the journey into the dark night. He describes and he pronounces the challenges one must face and one must survive in order to have the mystical union with God. The challenges that constitute the initiatory journey with a great boon, that greatest gift, the union, the mystical union with Source. For those familiar with Joseph Campbell's monomyth called The Hero's Journey, the hero must always face the challenges in the dark night of the soul. The power of the dark night of the soul is so strong that it causes the sudden change, as well as it laying the ground for a psychic change. It is a necessary part of the initiatory journey. In the greatest teaching moments that I've had within my life has had the hitting bottom aspect. The place where one cannot lift their head, that place where you can't get out of bed, the place where you don't feel that you can survive, the place that is the most bleak. In ancient times, journeying purposefully into the dark night of the soul has been considered a bridge to enlightenment. Both Jesus and Young talk about this journey. It is with no doubt it takes great courage to make the trip across the River Jordan, to make the trip from one place to the another, death, rebirth, and death again. When the high shamans look and they understand in order to be the high shaman, the Hatun Laika, there is an obligation of cleaving away more and more of the ego. This cleaving away ensures their safety of moving in between the worlds. For the shaman or the mystic, the adventure into the dark night of the soul is welcome experience. For the wisdom keeper understands truly that it is a place to connect. It is the place in the darkness that there is transcendence. The darkness often foreshadows a great change is on the horizon, an opportunity for even deeper spiritual growth. As they prepare, those shamans prepare themselves, they're always keeping an eye on the goal, the mystical union, that place where they can bring in and have more light filled within their body, mind, and soul. As shamans, we know that we are the map maker, the cartographers. It is our desire to journey into the unseen world, and the importance of this symbolic life cannot be stressed enough. From this symbolic journey, what we realize is this is the language, this is what we have to face. Looking back, I think of all the things that I've seen about going into the dark night of the soul, and there is a scene where Luke Skywalker is ready to walk into the place, the dark night of the soul. He turns to Yoda and says, "What will I find there?" And Yoda tells him only what he takes in with him. only what he takes in. Because by that time, when a shaman, a true Hatun Laika walks in, there's truly nothing but light. Without a guide or a shaman or a mentor to help us, though, what happens? Without help to negotiate this darkness, the experience can be devastating. We see evidence of this everywhere. People living in the dark night of the soul without a map. We see them on the subway, at the lunch counter, in our offices. We see them walking on the streets. There is a place within their lives that isn't quite there. They're not fully present. Like so many, I too fell into the hole of a meaningless life. I lost the sacredness of life. I lost that connection. So what I needed was a psychic change, this shift from that wounded victim into the healer. But I needed help. I needed help to do this. Without a mentor, I just kept dancing with the devil. I just kept dealing with the pain. So often it is on purpose that we find so much time in the dark night of the soul. On purpose because we're not prepared for that next shift, that next tunnel of light. But let me tell you one thing, and let me hear my words. When you're in that darkness, there is a light. And the light at the end of the tunnel is a light of illumination. It is not a train, unless you choose to stand on the train tracks. 12-step spirituality is a doorway, a portal. It is a shaman's initiatory path. It is a place for soul recovery, a modern model. And as the early wisdom keepers of 12-step spirituality profess the need to hit bottom, I have to agree with them. There is something special about hitting bottom and having a psychic change. It's like a doorway that we go that provides an opportunity. We cross in front of it without choosing to cross the threshold into that sacred realm. Since we have free will, you can choose not to enter. However, sometimes we are sucked through that door whether we want it or not. Sometimes we find ourselves in the dark night of the soul, not by choice, but by design. According to Stephen Larson's book, The Shaman's Doorway, Opening Imaginations to Power, in which he reflects a cross-cultural understanding of how we come to this sacred path. First, as he points out, there are two ways, and the first way is by ancestry, or by an initiate asking to be initiated into the lineage. Although Larson doesn't say it, I do believe that the ancestry aspect of one who asks to be initiated into the lineage is a resonance of DNA. It is the high shaman's responsibility to use in their own wisdom to decide, does the initiate have impeccability of intent? Do they have purity of purpose in order to take on the path, to step in? Many of us have come to this journey by asking, and there are many teachers who are willing to take us. And it is our great hope that when we come to the medicine, that we come with impeccability and purpose of intent. Understanding, however, if we don't, that the law of karma will have a teaching lesson farther down the line. I remember reading the words of Don Antonio to Alberto Viola. He said to Viola, there are very few shamans, very few true shamans, few true persons of knowledge. Many who tread this path stop along the way, and they are content to be healers and medicine men. They become masters of their own direction. And then there are those who become trapped by power, lost along the way. The second way of the path is what Larson calls a spontaneous call or election. In this instance, there is a belief that the initiate is chosen by spirits, that the symptoms of spontaneous election may include being hit by lightning, epileptic seizures. This cross-cultural recognizing of symptoms is that it is a supernatural call to the path. It can be near-death experience, surviving diseases, fatal diseases, including alcoholism, addiction, cancer. These experiences have been seen by the people as the initiate has been chosen for the path. Often is not seen as an honor, for the path is difficult. For one who has come by the path by ancestry or by asking to be initiate, the senior shaman will often replicate some of the experiences that a spontaneous election would have set forth. An individual may be put through severe ordeals. I think of the man called Horse. Larson explains that this can be exceptionally severe, plunging into ice-cold water, being left out in the element for days, fasting or not sleeping for days on end. This is to replicate again that relationship between life and death that spontaneous election brings just by the experience. Larson talks about a lecture he attended in New York, and the keynote speaker was Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell has written extensively about shamanism and an initiatory path. And he talked about shamanism and that the shaman must have and obtain an intimacy, a supernatural experience with the visions of death. Ultimately, the shaman, or those who experience the need for soul recovery, need to come into right relationship with death. A psychic change is needed. There needs to be death of the ego, death of a belief system. Cross-culturally, we understand that there is an intimacy of death for the shaman. The shaman is constantly going through the evolutionary process, birth, death, and rebirth. The old self must die to the ego again and again and again. Reflecting back to Don Antonio's words, I think about those who get trapped or lost. I was one of those who got lost and trapped. By the time I was 21, I had had several brushes with the dark night of the soul, including near-death experiences, a diagnosis of epilepsy, hospitalization for blood clots in my lungs and my leg. By this time, I was, not to mention, a blackout drinker since the age of 12. Insanity that goes with all of that can hardly be spoken about in a few moments. Unwilling to stop, or perhaps I just didn't know how. My soul wanted and lost. I managed to survive. I managed at least to keep my vitals going. For me, I knew that suicide wasn't a viable choice because I didn't believe in it. But somehow suicide by drugs and alcohol was different. I learned how to survive, as Pink Floyd says, by becoming comfortably numb. I learned how to medicate the emptiness that I felt deep into my soul. My need to be comfortably numb came to a thriving halt in one cathartic moment. In telling of my story, I have called on a sacred witness in friend and collaborator John Mishonis, a brilliant and talented writer. Together we're working on a project to bring many of these wisdom teachings to those that are not on the shamanic path, but yet might benefit from the wisdom, especially how to negotiate the dark night of the soul. So with John's help and support, I'd like you to listen. Shari's story, part 1. January 27th, 1982, Squaw Peak Police Station. I'm not steady on my feet despite the vice grip being firmly applied to my right arm by the police officer towering over me. Slowly listing to the left and then leaning to the right. I am also in flow in and out of consciousness like a television, the screen becoming to life only to have the power cord pulled. Blank, vaguely aware, I'm going in and out of life. In front of me stands the steel door ahead of the holding cell, not the ones I remember from my earlier adventures into the underworld of extreme intoxication. This time the cell is smaller, for one. It is the size of an old-style public phone booth. The second officer opens the cell door, and the two policemen press me forward into the small, dark space. It's cold. Behind me, the door of the holding cell slams shut. Shudders my heart, rolls through my gut. Instinctively, I realize I'm in a coffin. There's nowhere to go. I'm dying, buried alive. I'm way past my normal threshold of fear. I have shut down fear, fight, flight, freeze. Even depression carries some measure of energy that fuels negotiation, which in the past would have led me to think to myself, Lord, if you let me make it home tonight, I promise never to do it again. But this time is different. My emotional free fall has carried me deeper than fear. I have hit bottom. I am stunned. I am in complete stillness, dead possum frozen. There's no negotiation in the deepest reaches within the dark night of the soul. There is no motion, no feeling, no hope. My body collapses onto the cold steel bench. Who knows how long I was there before I've dropped back into consciousness. Then I sense a light streaming into the dark chamber through a slot, maybe 4 by 7 inches. But in the door, I see this light. My head hangs down, totally drained, complete defeat, suspended in time. Perhaps a half an hour, who knows, floating in a timeless moment, until I gather enough energy to utter one single syllable. Help. I have no idea to whom I'm directing this plea. It is not my parents, nor is it God, because that would have been another negotiation. I had nothing left, no fight, no negotiation, nothing. Help. I can't do this anymore. I am 21 years old, and I am done. Many of us have experienced the void of that timeless moment. No fear, just total acceptance of the situation as it is. There was no ego, no fight or flight, just surrender. Just surrendering to the timeless moment. There was no doubt that moment, that night, my life was changed forever, and that was over 30 years ago. So those places of true reduction, where there's not room for ego, our soul can be heard. It whispers to us, and that light comes shining through that one word, help, that opening up of my willingness to accept. Help is a small word uttered on a whisper in the wind. I surrendered. For others, it's a gut-wrenching scream. While my small whisper of help was only one word, for many, like Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, it comes in a scream. His rock bottom desperate scream of desperation after several attempts of dancing with the devil and the demons winning. Bill would call them rapturous creditors. They would show him themselves through alcohol. For him, it wasn't until December 1934 all hopes had been dashed. He had been told by the doctor that he would die. The doctor told his wife that it would only be a matter of time, that he would lose. He would have a wet brain and certain death. In the shocking moments of desperation in Towns Hospital in New York, Wilson, alone in a hospital room, screams out, "If there be a God, let him show himself. Let him show himself now." And in that moment, these are Wilson's own words of what happened. Suddenly, my room was ablaze with an indescribable white light. I was seized up with ecstasy beyond description of joy that I had ever known, was paled by comparison. The light, the ecstasy. I was conscious of nothing else for a time, and in my mind's eye there was a mountain. I stood upon the summit where the great wind blew, a wind not of air but of spirit. These were Wilson's own words. The shaman would recognize them as spontaneous experience. From the moment on psychic change, the great boon happened. Wilson, like myself, deflated, that spiritual rebirth happening. The world was changed because of his experience that night in 1934. The common factors that we often find are the deflation of ego. The surrendering of the ego becomes like a stepping stone for spiritual healing. Many of us, though, as we all know, are wired for survival, even if it means learning how to live in the darkness of the pain and the soul loss. Bill, like myself, learned how to live with the trauma and the drama and the darkness until each of us found our hitting bottom. Many have learned how to live with soul wounding. And without a map, of course, how do we handle this pain? The soul is always in contact with us. It whispers to us in the wind. It pulls on our heartstrings. It whispers that there is a way out. As we learn to surrender to the darkness and we become willing to go to any lengths, we look at the thought of, is it necessary to hit bottom? The ego must be right sized. There's no question about that. And for those who can't see the bottom coming up and ready to slap them and slap them hard, often they need to hit bottom. A wise and experienced mentor can quickly tell the difference between a student's actions of complying versus their willingness to truly hit bottom, to surrender and let go of ego. Willingness is a powerful spiritual principle, and a sure sign of willing to go to any length is a sign of surrender versus compliance. When we are complying, we're still negotiating. We're still doing the dance. There's enough ego still alive to do a little dance. This is not willingness to go to any lengths. Willingness to go to any lengths means that we are willing to do those things for our heart's desire. As many of us have traveled into the mountains, I wonder, making those great sacred trips into the mountains, how many would be willing to go if they had to provide their own food? Would you be willing to go if you had to eat what was served and do it graciously? While traveling into the mountains more than once, I noticed all the special orders for food, whether it be 15,000 feet, 17,000 feet. The requests for special orders kept coming like the avalanches in the night. I wonder, what would it be like if there were no substitutions? If there was that place where we had to be willing to go to any lengths? Would those sacred sites be as traveled as they are today? Would we be halted by our dietary restrictions? This idea of no substitutions is a clear principle in the 12-step model. In the early writings, these wisdom keepers believed that it was important to hit bottom because at that point you were willing to go to any lengths. And later in their writings, they talked about that it is everyone's privilege to come up with their own interpretation of a successful journey. However, there were no substitutions. 12 steps meant 12 steps. Without question, each of us have our own palate, and our bodies require different things. Would you be willing to carry your own food to go to the sacred sites? Would you be willing to carry your own food that you might need for your body without asking for substitutions or being a special project? Would you be willing to go to any lengths? Would you expect all your dietary needs to be taken care of because you have paid full price for this trip? Again, are you willing to go to any lengths to be self-reliant, to be sovereign? To be self-reliant or sovereign is an empowering place to be willing to go to any lengths, even journeying into the dark night of the soul, so you can find the gifts and the boons. There is a clear connection between willingness and actually hitting bottom to induce a psychic change. To the wisdom keeper and fellow 12-stepper Wayne Dyer, who recently passed this week, like many, I too have reflected on the many gifts that you shared. And the idea of being self-reliant is one of them. I remember you talking about how impressed you had been by the influential work of Emerson's 1846 essay on self-reliance. Following your lead, I too read this essay. And Emerson advises us that we learn to trust ourselves, truly what shamans would call to become self-reflective. The soul loss that is caused and so many of us live with is like our internal north gets turned upside down. As we go into the dark night of the soul, as we learn to right size our ego, that place of learning to trust ourselves and to become self-reliant becomes more and more online. I look to the words of Rolling Thunder, and he's often most well known for his work with the Grateful Dead. And what he would talk about over and over and over is that pollution begins in the mind. If you don't change your thinking, you're not going to change yourself or the world. How do we know where to begin? And I can offer you this: become the observer to your own thoughts. Are you drowning in your own mental pollution in the dark night of the soul? If the answer is yes, then look for a mentor, a sage, a wisdom keeper. Look for someone that will show you and help you how to pray, how to meditate, how to go with courageously into the dark night of the soul. So we look again, is hitting bottom necessary for soul recovery? There are many who would argue, yes, and obviously for myself and perhaps Bill Wilson, absolutely this would be a truth. But for others looking back who asked to be a part of the initiatory journey, to be a shaman, as they ask because their soul calls them, it is up to a mentor to take them through with wisdom into the dark night of the soul, to force to look at the psychic death of themselves, the challenges that it takes to live in that hell and be able to gather the wisdom, the gifts, and backing out and being able to live to tell about it. So for me, it was a necessary step. For Bill W., a necessary step. For many, a necessary step. I think that there are wiser people out there than I am who can see the bottom coming up hard and fast and step off the train, step off the insanity and gain wisdom from watching others. As the 12-step spirituality and their wisdom, slowly they changed even their stance and began to soften it. As teaching gets faster and faster doesn't mean that it's better. Because we are speeding up in our times doesn't mean that we shouldn't really go into depth in these teachings and the understanding. Today, as I turn 55 in a few months, I realize that it is my age and my experience that are my greatest gifts. I realize that the streaks of gray in my hair and the wrinkles on my face tell of a story. They tell of my badges, my courage, my wisdom. For me, they tell of the surviving of hitting bottom, an intimate relationship with death. From rising from the bottom like the phoenix, I have gained much wisdom. So how far are you willing to go? What are you willing to do to heal the dark night of the soul? As this sentiment is also reflected in that beautiful book called The Big Book, it is the basic text for those who follow a 12-step path. It was first published in 1939. If you look at the book and the wisdom teachings of this book, what you will see is what the High Shaman knows. And I'm quoting from the book written in 1939. The central fact of our lives today is absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and into our lives in a way that is indeed miraculous. We believe that there is no middle road solution. No middle road solution, no substitutions. For the shaman, too, there are no middle grounds, that we must also walk back and forth in between the worlds, that we must remain impeccable in our intent and purity of purpose. One reason we go back and forth and back again into the dark night of the soul is because we understand the gifts offered in the darkness. We understand that often suffering is what will bring the greatest boon. We find that in the stillness, we find a mentor who can help us negotiate our sovereignty. The dark night of the soul, my friends, holds a gift. It holds the gift and opportunity of your soul's recovery. So I thank you this evening for allowing me to be of service. And I hope that each and every one of you, no matter when you are listening to this call, will feel the wind blowing gently across your path. And for each of you, I will light a candle so that you know it is the light of hope and that you are held. Have a beautiful evening tonight. Many, many blessings. And this has been Shari BaDu. Good night.